The auction block fell silent as the auctioneer's gavel hovered in midair, suspended in that breathless moment between desperation and destiny, while a young woman clutched her infant daughter with trembling hands, her tear-stained face lifted toward the tall figure whose dark silhouette had just appeared at the back of the crowd. Whispers of Redemption. Tucson, Arizona Territory, 1875. Tamara Cooper kept her eyes fixed on the dusty ground beneath the auction platform, refusing to meet the prying gazes of the men who had gathered to bid on her and her 3-month-old daughter. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath the threadbare calico dress that hung from her once full figure. Her dark blonde hair had been hastily pinned up that morning, but several tendrils had escaped to cling to her damp neck. "Next up, gentlemen." The auctioneer's voice boomed across the small gathering. "A woman and her infant. Healthy, strong back, can cook and clean. Starting bid at $3. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The price was insultingly low, even for a woman auction. Tamara bit back a sob. $3. That was all her life and little Abigail's were worth now. "She ain't worth more than 2, someone called out. Laughter followed. "This ain't no pleasure auction, Hank," the auctioneer snapped. "Woman's being sold for labor. $3 is already a bargain." Tamara clutched Abigail tighter to her chest. The baby, mercifully, had fallen asleep, oblivious to the fact that her fate was being decided by strangers who saw them as property, not people. 3 months ago, when James had still been alive, she couldn't have imagined ending up here. But typhoid had taken him, and with him, all her security. The farm had been seized for debts. With no family and nowhere to turn, she'd been arrested for vagrancy when found sleeping in a barn with Abigail. The sheriff, instead of showing mercy, had decided to solve the problem by putting them up for auction as indentured servants to pay for her crimes. $2.50, a voice called out. Tamara's stomach turned. She recognized that voice. It belonged to Silas Jennings, owner of the saloon at the edge of town. Rumors about how he treated his female employees made her blood run cold. $2.75. Another voice. This time, old Farmer Wilkins. He'd lost his wife last winter and was known to work his farm hands from sunrise to well past sunset. $3, called Jennings again, his voice carrying a note of finality that made Tamara shudder. The auctioneer glanced around. $3 going once. Tamara closed her eyes, saying a silent prayer. Abigail stirred against her chest. Going twice. $10. The new voice cut through the air like a knife. Deep, steady, commanding. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as heads turned toward the back. Tamara's eyes flew open. Standing at the rear of the gathering was a tall man in a black hat pulled low over his eyes. He wore a dark duster coat despite the heat, and even from a distance, she could see the glint of silver spurs on his boots. His face was partially obscured by the hat and the shadow it cast, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in a short, neatly trimmed beard. $10, the auctioneer repeated, surprise evident in his voice. "You deaf?" the stranger drawled. $10. Silas Jennings turned, his face flushing with anger. "Now see here, 15, the stranger cut him off, his voice remaining level. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Tamara felt lightheaded. What was happening? Who was this man? $15 going once, the auctioneer said, his eyebrows raised nearly to his hairline. Jennings sputtered, but said nothing more. Going twice. Sold. To the gentleman in the black hat. Tamara's legs nearly gave out beneath her as the auctioneer motioned for her to step down from the platform. The stranger was already striding forward, his long legs eating up the distance between them. As he approached, she got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. His eyes were a startling blue, set deep under straight brows. His nose had been broken at some point and hadn't healed quite straight, giving his otherwise handsome face a rugged quality. Those blue eyes assessed her quickly before he nodded once. "Name's Nathan Drake," he said simply. "Get your things. We're leaving." Tamara swallowed hard. I don't have any things, Mr. Drake." All she had in the world was the dress she wore and the small blanket wrapped around Abigail. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or concern, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Then we'll head out now." He turned, clearly expecting her to follow. "Wait," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. When he paused and looked back at her, she gathered her courage. "Why? Why did you buy us?" His expression remained unreadable. "Got a ranch that needs looking after. Need someone to cook and clean." His eyes dropped to Abigail. "The little one wasn't part of my plan, but I reckon she comes with you." "Yes," Tamara said firmly, holding her daughter closer. "She does." Nathan nodded. "My wagon's this way." As they walked through town, Tamara felt the weight of stares from every porch and window. She kept her head down, shame burning through her. How had her life come to this? Following a stranger who now essentially owned her? Nathan's wagon was waiting at the edge of town, a sturdy, well-maintained buckboard with 2 strong horses. He gestured for her to climb up onto the seat. "It's about an hour's ride to my place," he said, offering a hand to help her up. Tamara hesitated before accepting his assistance, balancing Abigail carefully as she climbed onto the wagon. His hand was calloused but gentle, releasing her the moment she was seated. He climbed up beside her, keeping a respectful distance between them. As they pulled away from town, Tamara took her first deep breath in what felt like days. Whatever awaited her at Nathan Drake's ranch, it had to be better than the fate that had nearly been hers with Silas Jennings. They rode in silence for several miles, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clip-clop of the horses, and Abigail's occasional soft noises. The terrain grew more rugged as they left the well-traveled road, moving into gently rolling hills dotted with mesquite and saguaro cacti. "Mr. Drake," Tamara finally ventured, "I want to thank you for—" "Don't thank me yet," he interrupted, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "You don't know what you're getting into." A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean by that?" He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Just that ranch life is hard. Especially out here. We're pretty isolated. Closest neighbor is 5 miles away." Isolated. The word hung in the air between them. Tamara clutched Abigail tighter, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. She was alone with a stranger, heading to an isolated location. What had she been thinking? As if reading her thoughts, Nathan spoke again. "You'll have your own quarters. Small cabin behind the main house. Used to be for the ranch foreman, but he moved on some months back." He paused. "Lock on the door. You can use it." The tension in Tamara's shoulders eased slightly. At least he wasn't expecting her to share his home or, worse, his bed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "How old is she?" he asked unexpectedly, nodding toward Abigail. 3 months. "Father?" "Dead." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Typhoid. 3 months ago." Nathan nodded slowly. "Sorry to hear it." They fell back into silence. Tamara studied him from the corner of her eye. His profile was strong, his posture straight but relaxed. He handled the horses with casual confidence, his hands steady on the reins. Despite his imposing presence, there was something about him that didn't feel threatening, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. "There it is," he said eventually, gesturing ahead with a slight tilt of his chin. Tamara looked up to see a ranch house appearing in the distance. It sat nestled against the base of a small hill, with several outbuildings scattered around it. As they drew closer, she could make out a corral with a few horses, a barn, and what appeared to be the small cabin he'd mentioned. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling single-story structure built of adobe with a wooden porch wrapping around two sides. It looked well-maintained, with curtains visible in the windows and smoke curling from the chimney. "Someone's expecting us?" she asked, surprised.
Rosa.
"Comes in 3 times a week to cook and clean. Told her I might be bringing back help today." They pulled up in front of the house, and Nathan set the brake before jumping down. He came around to her side and offered his hand again. Tamara accepted it, carefully navigating her way down while holding Abigail. The front door of the house opened, and an older Mexican woman stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark eyes widened slightly at the sight of Tamara and the baby. "Mr. Drake," she said, her accent thick but her English clear, "you did not say the help would be a mother with child." "Didn't know myself until today, Rosa," he replied. He turned to Tamara. "This is Rosa Alvarez. Best cook in the territory, and the only reason this place doesn't fall apart around my ears." Rosa snorted but looked pleased at the compliment. Her gaze softened as it fell on Abigail. "Such a little one. How old?" 3 months, Tamara replied. Rosa nodded. "She needs food, yes? And you too. You are too thin." She gestured for them to follow her inside. The interior of the house surprised Tamara even more than its exterior. It was clean and well-furnished, with good quality pieces that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with comfortable-looking chairs arranged before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that appeared well-read. This was not the home of a rough, uneducated rancher. It was the home of someone with taste and education. "Rosa," Nathan said, "Mrs. Cooper will be staying in the foreman's cabin. Can you help her get settled? She'll need everything." He looked at Tamara. "I assume you'll need things for the baby as well?" Tamara nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden kindness after everything she'd been through.
"Yes."
We have nothing. Rosa will take you into town tomorrow to get what you need. For tonight, we'll make do." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch, handing it to Rosa. "Get her whatever she requires." "Thank you," Tamara whispered, fighting back tears. Nathan looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You'll earn your keep," he said gruffly. "We'll discuss your duties tomorrow. For now, get some rest." With that, he nodded to them both and strode back outside. Rosa clicked her tongue as the door closed behind him. That man, always running away from feelings. She smiled at Tamara.
"Come."
"You must be hungry. I have stew, and we will find something for the little one." As Tamara followed Rosa to the kitchen, she felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. Whatever had motivated Nathan Drake to buy her contract, he didn't seem to be a cruel man. Perhaps here, she and Abigail might find some measure of safety, at least for a while. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Tamara had slept better than she had in months, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. The foreman's cabin was small but clean, with a comfortable bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, and a rocking chair that Rosa had insisted on carrying over from the main house when she learned about Abigail. A soft knock at the door roused her fully. Checking that Abigail was still sleeping peacefully in the makeshift crib Nathan had constructed last night from a wooden crate and some blankets, Tamara opened the door to find Rosa standing there with a basket. "Breakfast," the older woman announced, bustling inside. "Mr. Drake says to come to the house when you are ready. He wishes to speak with you about your duties." Tamara's stomach tightened with anxiety, but she nodded. "I'll be there as soon as I've eaten and tended to Abigail." Rosa set the basket on the table and began unpacking it: fresh biscuits, a jar of preserves, some sliced ham, and a small pot of coffee. The aroma made Tamara's mouth water. "How is the little one this morning?" Rosa asked. "She slept well," Tamara replied, glancing at her daughter. "Better than she has in weeks." "Babies know when their mothers are at ease," Rosa said wisely. And when they are not. She paused, her dark eyes studying Tamara. Mr. Drake, he is a good man. Strange sometimes, but good. You need not fear him. Tamara wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had learned the hard way that men who seemed good often weren't, once you were in their power. But Nathan Drake had treated her with nothing but respect so far. Thank you for breakfast, she said instead. And for all your help yesterday. Rosa waved away her thanks. It is nothing. Now eat. Mr. Drake does not like to be kept waiting. With that, she departed, leaving Tamara to her breakfast. An hour later, washed and dressed in the same worn dress, but feeling somewhat refreshed, Tamara made her way to the main house with Abigail in her arms. She knocked tentatively on the front door. It opened almost immediately, revealing Nathan. He had evidently been up for hours. His face was freshly shaven, and he wore a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms. Mrs. Cooper, he greeted her.
Come in.
He led her to a small study off the main room. It was a masculine space, dominated by a large desk covered with papers, ledgers, and maps. Bookshelves lined the walls here too, and a rifle hung on pegs above the door. Please sit, he said, gesturing to a chair in front of the desk. He remained standing, leaning against the desk rather than sitting behind it. It struck her as a deliberate choice, not to place the barrier of the desk between them. I suppose we should discuss terms, he began. Your contract is for 1 year of service. After that, you're free to go or to renegotiate if you wish to stay on. Tamara nodded, surprised by the relatively short term. Most indentured contracts ran for multiple years. During that time, he continued, you'll be expected to cook, clean, and generally help maintain the house. Rosa will continue to come 3 days a week, but there's more than enough work for 2, especially with her getting on in years. I understand, Tamara said. I'm a good cook, and I kept a clean house for my husband. Nathan nodded.
Good.
In exchange, you'll receive room and board for yourself and your daughter, plus a small wage. He named a sum that, while modest, was far more generous than she had expected. The money is yours to keep or save as you see fit. Tamara stared at him in confusion. A wage? But I thought the auction. I'm not in the business of slavery, Mrs. Cooper, he said firmly. I bought your contract because it seemed the quickest way to get you out of that situation, but I have no interest in owning another human being. Then why, she began, but he cut her off. I needed help around the place. You needed help, period. He shrugged as if it were that simple. Seemed like a solution that worked for both of us. Tamara wasn't convinced. Men didn't typically spend money out of the goodness of their hearts, especially not on strange women. There had to be more to it. What about Abigail? She asked. Will I be able to care for her while I work? Nathan's eyes softened slightly as they fell on the baby. Of course. I don't expect you to neglect your child. Work around her schedule as needed. He paused. Though I imagine having a baby in the kitchen while you're cooking might be dangerous. Rosa has offered to help when she's here. Relief flooded through Tamara. Thank you, Mr. Drake. That's very generous. He looked uncomfortable again, the way he had when she'd thanked him yesterday. It's just practical, he said. Now, Rosa will take you into town today to get what you need. Clothes for you both, supplies for the baby, whatever else you require. He straightened up. Any questions? Tamara had dozens, but she settled on the most pressing. Mr. Drake, why did you really buy my contract? The truth, please. His blue eyes met hers steadily. Because I know Silas Jennings, and I know what happens to women in his establishment. And because no child deserves to grow up in a place like that. He looked away. Let's leave it at that. Before she could press further, there was a knock at the front door. Nathan pushed away from the desk. That'll be Rosa, with the wagon. You should get going if you want to make it to town and back before dark. The trip to town was illuminating in many ways. As they rode, Rosa filled Tamara in on Nathan Drake and his ranch. He came here 5 years ago, Rosa explained. Bought the land when nobody thought it would amount to much. But he knew water, where to find it, how to manage it. Now his cattle are the fattest in the territory, and his horses bring top dollar. He seems educated, Tamara ventured.
Rosa nodded.
He was a surveyor before. Worked for the railroad, I think. Knows more about books and maps than most men out here. She glanced at Tamara. He is a private man.
Does not speak of his past.
But he is fair and treats his workers well. Has he ever been married? Tamara asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't her business. Rosa, however, didn't seem bothered by the inquiry.
No.
There was a woman once, I think, before he came here. He never speaks of her, but sometimes. She shrugged. Sometimes men carry ghosts in their eyes. Mr. Drake has such ghosts. Tamara understood that all too well. She carried her own ghosts, James, their life together, the future they'd planned that had died with him. In town, they visited the general store first. The proprietor, Mr. Winters, greeted Rosa warmly, but eyed Tamara with undisguised curiosity. Word of the auction had clearly spread. Mrs. Cooper is working for Mr. Drake now, Rosa announced firmly, daring the man to comment. We need many things. To his credit, Mr. Winters simply nodded and proceeded to help them gather what they needed. With Rosa's guidance, Tamara selected 2 serviceable day dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, and a shawl for herself. For Abigail, they found soft flannel for diapers, several gowns, and a warm blanket. They added basic toiletries, a hairbrush, and a few other necessities to their purchases. The bill came to more than Tamara would have earned in 2 months in her previous life, but Rosa handed over the money without batting an eye. Mr. Drake said whatever you need, she reminded Tamara when she tried to protest the expense. Their next stop was to see Mrs. Wilson, the seamstress, who promised to make a proper crib bedding set for Abigail. Then they visited the apothecary for some salve for Abigail's occasional rash, and finally, they stopped at the milliner's for a sunbonnet to protect Tamara from the harsh Arizona sun. Throughout their shopping expedition, Tamara was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone knew she'd been on the auction block just yesterday. Ignore them, Rosa advised as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. People talk, then they find new things to talk about. In a week, they will forget. Tamara wasn't so sure, but she appreciated the older woman's support. As they prepared to leave town, a figure stepped into their path, Silas Jennings. His thin lips were curved into an unpleasant smile. Well, if it ain't Drake's new purchase, he drawled, his eyes raking over Tamara in a way that made her skin crawl. Pretty little thing. Wonder how long before he tires of you. Rosa stepped forward, her small frame suddenly imposing. Move aside, Jennings. We have no business with you. Just being neighborly, he said, but his eyes remained cold. Tell Drake I said congratulations on his new acquisition. He emphasized the word with nasty insinuation. Mr. Drake is a gentleman, Rosa snapped. Not like some men who prey on women's misfortune. She climbed onto the wagon seat, gesturing for Tamara to join her. Come, Mrs. Cooper. We have wasted enough time here. As they drove away, Tamara could feel Jennings's eyes boring into her back. He seems to have a grudge against Mr. Drake, she observed quietly.
Rosa snorted.
That man has a grudge against anyone decent. But yes, he and Mr. Drake have history. She glanced at Tamara. 2 years ago, one of Jennings's girls ran away. She was just 16, brought west with promises of legitimate work. Mr. Drake found her half dead on his property and nursed her back to health. Then he got her on a stage to San Francisco, where she had an aunt. What happened? Jennings came looking for her with some of his men.
There was
trouble. Rosa's face grew grim. 2 of Jennings's men did not leave the ranch alive. The sheriff ruled it self-defense, but Jennings has hated Mr. Drake ever since. Tamara absorbed this information silently, her view of Nathan Drake shifting yet again. A man who would risk his life to protect a young girl from men like Jennings was indeed a rare breed out here. They arrived back at the ranch in late afternoon to find Nathan working with a horse in the corral. He was shirtless in the heat, his tan skin gleaming with sweat as he guided the young stallion through its paces. Tamara found herself unable to look away from the play of muscles across his broad shoulders and back. He spotted them as they pulled up and grabbed his shirt from the fence post, shrugging it on as he walked over to help unload their purchases. "Got everything you need?" he asked, lifting a heavy crate from the wagon bed with ease. "Yes, thank you," Tamara replied, suddenly shy in his presence. "Mr. Drake, I want you to know that I intend to repay you for all of this as soon as I can." He paused, studying her face. "There's no need. Consider it an advance on your wages, if it makes you feel better." "It does," she admitted. "I don't like being beholden." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen from him. "Fair enough, Mrs. Cooper. I can respect that." That evening, as Tamara sat in her cabin rocking Abigail to sleep, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just 24 hours ago, she had been facing a future so bleak she'd contemplated the unthinkable taking her own life, and Abigail's, rather than submitting to whatever fate awaited them at the hands of men like Silas Jennings. Now she had shelter, food, clean clothes, and the promise of fair treatment. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of as a girl, or even the modest happiness she'd found with James, but it was a chance, a lifeline, and for now, that would have to be enough. The next few weeks settled into a steady routine. Tamara rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for Nathan and any ranch hands who happened to be around. Then she would tackle the day's cleaning and washing, pausing frequently to tend to Abigail. In the afternoons, she prepared dinner, which Nathan usually ate alone in the dining room while she fed Abigail in the kitchen. On days when Rosa came, the workload was lighter, and the Mexican woman always insisted on holding Abigail so Tamara could have a break. Nathan himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but reserved, spending most of his days out on the ranch and his evenings in his study with his books and papers. Sometimes Tamara would bring him coffee or tea and find him absorbed in a volume of poetry or philosophy, hardly the reading material she would have expected from a rancher. On these occasions, they might exchange a few words about the book or the weather or some task that needed attention around the house, but he never engaged in personal conversation. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Tamara was hanging freshly washed curtains in the main room when Nathan returned early from checking the northern pasture. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her stretch to reach the curtain rod. "Let me help with that," he said, crossing the room in a few long strides. "You'll fall and break your neck trying to reach that high." He took the curtain from her hands, his fingers brushing against hers briefly, sending an unexpected spark through her. Standing close beside her, he easily hung the curtain, his height making the task effortless. "Thank you," she said, stepping back to admire the fresh white fabric. They needed washing badly. "The whole place needed a woman's touch," he acknowledged. "You've made a difference here, Mrs. Cooper." The compliment warmed her. "I'm glad to be useful." He looked around the room, noting the other small changes she'd made: wildflowers and a jar on the table, the furniture rearranged to create a more conversational grouping, the polished wood surfaces gleaming in the late afternoon light. "It reminds me of," he began, then stopped himself. "Of what?" she prompted gently. He shook his head. "Nothing important." He glanced toward the kitchen. "Something smells good." "Beef stew," she replied, allowing him to change the subject. "And I baked bread this morning." "You're spoiling me," he said with another of his rare half-smiles. "I was living on Rosa's cooking 3 days a week and my own terrible attempts the rest of the time before you came." Well, we can't have the most successful rancher in the territory starving to death, she teased, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes warmed at her light tone. Indeed not. That would be a tragedy. He glanced toward the window. Storm's coming in. I need to check on the horses before it hits. Save me some of that stew. Of course. As he headed back outside, Tamara found herself watching him go with a strange flutter in her chest. She was becoming dangerously accustomed to his presence, to their quiet exchanges, to the way his eyes sometimes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It was a complication she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure how to handle. That night, the promised storm rolled in with terrifying force. Tamara huddled in her cabin, soothing a frightened Abigail as thunder crashed overhead and rain lashed against the windows. The wind howled around the small structure, finding every crack and crevice to whistle through. A particularly violent gust shook the cabin, and suddenly there was a sharp crack followed by a rush of water. Tamara looked up in horror to see a portion of the roof had given way, allowing rain to pour in. Within minutes, a substantial puddle had formed on the floor and was growing rapidly. Gathering Abigail and a blanket, Tamara made a dash for the main house, getting soaked in the 20-yard sprint. She pounded on the door, praying Nathan would hear her over the storm. The door swung open almost immediately. Nathan stood there in his shirt sleeves, looking concerned. What happened? The roof, she gasped, water streaming down her face. Part of it collapsed. Get inside, he ordered, ushering her in and closing the door against the wind. Are you hurt?
No, just wet.
But everything in the cabin will be ruined if we don't do something. The storm's too strong to make repairs now, he said firmly. We'll have to wait until morning. He glanced at Abigail, who was whimpering softly against Tamara's shoulder. Is she all right? Just frightened, I think. Tamara tried to soothe her daughter, but she was shivering too hard herself to be very effective. Nathan frowned. You need dry clothes. Come with me. He led her to a bedroom at the back of the house. This was my mother's room when she visited, he explained, opening a trunk at the foot of the bed. There should be some things in here that might fit you. He pulled out a simple cotton nightgown and robe. They're old but clean. I'll leave you to change. There are towels in that cupboard. He pointed, then hesitated. The bed is made up. You and Abigail should stay here tonight. Where will you sleep? She asked, suddenly aware that she was in his home, dripping wet, about to change into his mother's clothes. I have my own room, he said simply. Come to the kitchen when you're ready. I'll make some tea to warm you up. Once he'd gone, Tamara quickly dried herself and Abigail, changing them both into dry clothes. The nightgown was a bit large but comfortable, and the robe wrapped around her securely. Abigail, exhausted from the excitement and now warm and dry, had fallen asleep. Tamara laid her carefully in the center of the bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling off, then made her way to the kitchen. Nathan was standing at the stove, his back to her as he prepared the tea. He'd lit several lamps, casting the room in a warm golden glow that contrasted with the wild darkness outside. He turned as she entered, and something flickered across his face as he took in her appearance in his mother's clothes, her damp hair loose around her shoulders. Feel better? He asked, his voice a touch gruffer than usual. Much, thank you. She sat at the kitchen table, suddenly shy. This was the first time they'd been truly alone together in such a domestic setting. During the day, there were always ranch hands coming and going, or Rosa bustling about, or the buffer of their respective duties keeping them in separate spheres. He placed a steaming cup of tea in front of her, then sat across the table with his own. Sugar? No, thank you. This is perfect. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, savoring the heat. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, listening to the storm rage outside. Tamara found herself studying Nathan's face in the lamplight. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun, and a small scar near his temple that she hadn't noticed before. His hands, wrapped around his own cup, were strong and capable, yet he handled the delicate china with surprising gentleness. "May I ask you something, Mr. Drake?" she ventured. He looked up, those blue eyes focusing intently on her face. "You may ask. I may not answer." She smiled faintly at his honesty. "Fair enough. I was just wondering. You mentioned your mother visiting. Is she still living?" "No," he replied after a moment. "She passed 3 years ago. My father 5 years before that." "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "Do you have other family?" He took a sip of his tea before answering. "A sister in Boston. Married to a banker. We write occasionally." "But you prefer it out here," she observed. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Always did have more of a taste for open spaces than drawing rooms. He studied her over the rim of his cup. "What about you? Any family besides your husband?" Tamara shook her head. "My parents died when I was 16. Yellow fever. I went to work as a companion to an elderly lady after that. That's where I met James, her grandson. When she died, we married and decided to try our luck out west." She stared into her tea. "It didn't work out quite as we'd planned." "Life rarely does," Nathan said quietly. A particularly loud crash of thunder made them both start. Tamara glanced anxiously toward the bedroom where Abigail slept. "She'll be fine," Nathan assured her. "That room's the most solid part of the house. Built it myself." "You built this house?" Tamara asked, impressed. "Most of it. Had help with the roof and some of the interior work." He shrugged. Seemed important to have a proper home, not just a shack like most new ranchers put up. "It's a beautiful home," she said honestly. "You've created something wonderful here." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxing of his mouth. "Thank you." He finished his tea and stood. "You should get some rest. I'll check on your cabin at first light, see what needs to be done." Tamara rose as well. "Thank you for the tea. And for taking us in tonight." "It's nothing," he said, but his eyes told a different story. There was a warmth there that hadn't been present before, an awareness of her as a woman, not just an employee. For a suspended moment, they stood looking at each other across the kitchen, the storm forgotten. Then Nathan cleared his throat and stepped back. "Good night, Mrs. Cooper." "Good night, Mr. Drake." As Tamara slipped into bed beside her sleeping daughter, she found herself thinking about the man in the other room. Nathan Drake was nothing like she'd initially imagined, and that realization was both intriguing and terrifying. Because for the first time since James's death, she found herself drawn to a man not just out of gratitude or necessity, but genuine attraction. And that was a complication neither of them needed. The damage to the cabin roof was worse than they'd feared. The morning light revealed a substantial hole where rotting wood had finally given way under the storm's onslaught. Most of Tamara's new possessions had been soaked, though thankfully, the crib and bedding had escaped the worst of it. "It'll take at least a week to repair properly," Nathan announced after inspecting the damage. "And everything needs to dry out completely before you can move back in." "What should we do in the meantime?" Tamara asked, bouncing Abigail on her hip. The baby was in high spirits this morning, oblivious to their housing predicament. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, which was still damp from his pre-dawn check of the property. "You'll have to stay in the main house. There's no other option." Tamara bit her lip. The prospect of living under the same roof as Nathan for a week or more filled her with both anticipation and dread. "Are you sure that's appropriate?" He gave her a wry look. "Mrs. Cooper, I think we're well past worrying about appearances. Half the town already believes the worst, given how you came to be here." Her cheeks heated at the reminder. Of course people would assume Nathan had bought her for immoral purposes. It was the most logical conclusion, given the circumstances of the auction. "You're right," she conceded. And it's not as if we have much choice. No, we don't. He looked at Abigail, who was reaching for him with a chubby hand and an expectant expression. After a moment's hesitation, he offered her his finger, which she promptly grabbed with surprising strength. A small smile touched his lips. She's got a good grip. She's determined, Tamara agreed, watching the interaction with interest. It was the first time Nathan had directly engaged with Abigail, and the tenderness in his expression as the baby held onto his finger was unexpected and touching. Like her mother, he observed quietly, his eyes lifting to meet Tamara's. Something passed between them, then a moment of mutual recognition, of seeing and being seen. It left Tamara feeling slightly breathless. Nathan was the first to break the connection, gently extracting his finger from Abigail's grip. I'll have the men bring your things to the house. We can salvage what we can. The next week brought a new dimension to their relationship. Sharing living space created an intimacy that had been absent before. Tamara learned that Nathan rose before dawn each day and took his coffee black on the porch, watching the sunrise. He discovered that she hummed softly while she worked, old lullabies and hymns that her mother had taught her. In the evenings after Abigail was asleep, they often found themselves sitting together in the main room. Sometimes Nathan read aloud from one of his books, poetry by Whitman or Tennyson, essays by Emerson, even passages from novels that he particularly admired. Tamara would sew or mend as she listened, finding unexpected pleasure in his deep voice giving life to the beautiful words. Other times, they simply talked. Nathan was surprisingly well-traveled for a rancher, having worked as a surveyor across much of the Western Territories before settling in Arizona. Tamara shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. Gradually, the formal Mr. Drake and Mrs. Cooper gave way to Nathan and Tamara, though only in private, when no ranch hands or Rosa were present to notice the shift. 5 days after the storm, they were sitting before the fireplace, a chessboard between them. Nathan had been teaching her the game, and to his evident surprise, she was proving a quick study. Check, she announced triumphantly, moving her bishop to threaten his king. Nathan studied the board with narrowed eyes, then chuckled. Well played.
But
He moved his knight, capturing her bishop. Not quite checkmate. Tamara groaned good-naturedly. I was so close. You're improving rapidly, he acknowledged. Another month and you'll be beating me regularly. The casual reference to the future to her still being here a month from now, and beyond hung in the air between them. Tamara's contract was for a year, but they had never discussed what might happen after that. Nathan, she began carefully, I've been meaning to ask you something. He looked up, his expression open. What is it? That day at the auction. You said you bought my contract because you knew what would happen to me at Jennings's place. But there must have been other women in similar situations before. What made you step in for me specifically? Nathan was silent for a long moment, his eyes returning to the chessboard. Just when Tamara thought he wouldn't answer, he spoke. I wasn't planning to be at that auction at all, he said quietly. I was in town to order supplies and heard about it by chance. Someone mentioned there was a woman with a baby being sold for debt. His jaw tightened. It reminded me of something from my past. What? Tamara prompted gently, when he fell silent again. Nathan sighed, leaning back in his chair. My mother and I were almost sold that way once, after my father disappeared during the California gold rush. I was just a boy, maybe 6 years old. We'd run out of money, couldn't pay our rent. The landlord was going to sell our debt to a man who owned a mining camp brothel. Tamara's hand flew to her mouth. How terrible! What happened? My father's brother found us just in time, paid our debts, took us back east to live with him. Nathan's eyes were distant, seeing that long ago past. But I never forgot the look on my mother's face that day, the desperation, the fear. When I saw you standing on that platform with your baby, he shrugged. I couldn't walk away. Tamara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. "And thank you again for what you did. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Nathan reached across the chessboard and, in a gesture that startled them both, took her hand in his. "You already have," he said simply. "You've brought life back to this house. I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." The warmth of his hand around her sent a flutter through her chest. She was acutely aware of how improper this was, how dangerous these growing feelings could be. She was still technically in his employ, still bound by the contract he'd purchased. And yet, the sound of Abigail crying from the bedroom broke the moment. Tamara withdrew her hand reluctantly. "I should check on her." Nathan nodded, sitting back. "Of course." As Tamara rose to tend to her daughter, she felt his eyes following her and knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. The question was, where would it lead? The next morning, Nathan announced that the cabin repairs were complete. "You can move back in today if you wish," he said over breakfast, not quite meeting her eyes. "Everything's dry, and I had the men replace all the damaged roof timbers." Tamara felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She had grown accustomed to these shared breakfasts, to the casual domesticity of living under the same roof. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "That's good news." "Of course, there's no rush," he added quickly. "If you want to stay another day or two, make sure everything's properly settled." "That might be wise," she agreed, perhaps too eagerly. "Just to be certain everything's truly dry." Their eyes met across the table, and Tamara knew they were both making excuses. Neither was ready to return to the more distant relationship they'd had before the storm. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Nathan frowned. It was too early for casual visitors. "Excuse me," he said, rising to answer it. Tamara heard men's voices at the door, one of them raised in anger. Curious, she moved to the kitchen doorway to see who had arrived. Sheriff Mills stood in the entryway, looking uncomfortable. Beside him was Silas Jennings, his thin face twisted with malicious satisfaction. "What's this about, Sheriff?" Nathan was asking, his posture tense. "Got a complaint, Drake," Mills replied, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mr. Jennings here says you're harboring a woman under inappropriate circumstances." Jennings's cold eyes found Tamara in the doorway. "There she is," he said triumphantly. "Living in sin with him, just as I said." Tamara felt her face flame with indignation. "That's not true." Nathan's voice remained level, though she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "Mrs. Cooper works for me as a housekeeper. Her cabin was damaged in the storm last week, so she's been staying in the main house temporarily. There's nothing inappropriate about the arrangement." "A likely story," Jennings sneered. "Everyone knows why you really bought her at that auction, Drake. Don't pretend it was for her cooking." Nathan took a step toward Jennings, his hands clenching into fists, but Sheriff Mills quickly moved between them. "Now hold on," the sheriff said. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Drake, you say this is just a temporary situation due to storm damage." "That's right," Nathan confirmed. "The repairs were completed yesterday. Mrs. Cooper was planning to move back to the cabin today." Mills nodded slowly. "All right then. I don't see a problem here, Jennings. Sounds like a legitimate explanation to me." Jennings wasn't satisfied. "What about the auction?" "You can't deny he bought her like a piece of property." "I purchased her labor contract," Nathan corrected coldly. "A perfectly legal transaction, as you well know." "And where is this contract?" Jennings demanded. "I'd like to see the terms." Nathan stiffened. "That's private business between Mrs. Cooper and myself." Tamara stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "Mr. Drake has been nothing but honorable and respectful since I came here," she said firmly. "He rescued me and my daughter from a terrible situation, and I won't stand by while you impugn his character or mine." Sheriff Mills looked relieved at her intervention. "There you have it, Jennings. The lady herself confirms everything's proper. Now, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing. Jennings glared at them all. This isn't over, he warned. People in town are talking. They don't like what they're hearing about this arrangement. People in town should mind their own business, Nathan said evenly. Now, if you'll excuse us, Sheriff, Mr. Jennings, we have work to do. After they'd gone, Tamara sank into a chair, trembling slightly. I can't believe he would do that, she said. Coming here with a sheriff, making those accusations. Nathan's face was grim. Jennings has been looking for ways to cause trouble for me for years. This was just a convenient opportunity. He ran a hand through his hair. But he's right about one thing: people are talking. And that could be dangerous for your reputation. My reputation? Tamara gave a bitter laugh. I was sold at auction, Nathan. I don't think my reputation can get much worse in this town's eyes. Still, he insisted, we should be more careful. You should move back to the cabin today as planned. She nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right. Of course. I'll start packing our things. As she gathered Abigail's clothes and toys, Tamara couldn't help feeling that something precious was slipping away: the brief, sweet intimacy they'd shared during their week under one roof. But perhaps it was for the best. These growing feelings for Nathan were complicated enough without adding the scandal of impropriety to the mix. That afternoon, as she settled back into the cabin, Tamara tried to convince herself that things would return to normal now. She would continue her duties as housekeeper. Nathan would run his ranch, and they would maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. It was the sensible course of action. But as she glanced out the window toward the main house, where Nathan was visible on the porch, staring out at the horizon with a pensive expression, Tamara knew that sensible had little to do with the way her heart raced whenever he was near. And that was a problem with no easy solution. The weeks following Jennings's visit were strained. Nathan and Tamara fell back into their previous routine, but the easy companionship they'd developed during their week of shared living was replaced by a careful formality. They were polite, professional, and painfully aware of each other. Tamara threw herself into her work, cleaning parts of the house that hadn't seen a dust cloth in years, cooking increasingly elaborate meals, and tending to Abigail with single-minded devotion. Nathan spent more time out on the range than usual, often returning after Tamara had retired to the cabin for the night. The only bright spot in this difficult period was Abigail, who at 4 months old was becoming more alert and interactive by the day. Her first real smile had been for Rosa, who had promptly burst into tears of joy. Her second had been for Nathan, on one of the rare evenings when he'd returned early enough to see her before bedtime. Tamara had been singing softly to Abigail in the kitchen while preparing dinner when Nathan had entered quietly through the back door. He'd paused in the doorway, watching them with an unreadable expression. When Abigail had noticed him, her whole face had lit up with a gummy smile so brilliant that Nathan had actually taken a step backward in surprise. She smiled at me, he'd said, sounding astonished. She likes you, Tamara had replied simply. The moment had broken through the awkwardness between them, if only briefly. As June turned into July, the summer heat became oppressive. The ranch hands spoke of drought conditions to the south, though Nathan's careful water management meant his land was faring better than most. Still, everyone kept a wary eye on the sky, hoping for rain. One scorching afternoon, Tamara was in the garden behind the house, harvesting vegetables for dinner. Abigail lay on a blanket in the shade of a mesquite tree, contentedly batting at a small wooden toy Nathan had carved for her. Tamara straightened, pressing a hand to her aching back. The heat was making her lightheaded, and she decided to take a short break. She was just settling beside Abigail when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Nathan riding in from the east pasture, accompanied by 2 of his ranch hands. They were driving a small herd of cattle toward the corral near the barn. Nathan spotted her and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back, then watched as he expertly guided his horse around the cattle, keeping them moving in the right direction. Even from a distance, she could appreciate the ease with which he sat in the saddle, the fluid communication between man and horse. There was something undeniably attractive about competence, she reflected, especially when it came wrapped in a package as appealing as Nathan Drake. Her pleasant observations were interrupted by a sudden commotion. One of the steers, a large bull with impressive horns, had broken away from the herd and was charging directly toward the garden toward Tamara and Abigail. For a moment, Tamara froze in terror. Then maternal instinct took over. She scooped up Abigail and turned to run, but the bull was too close, moving too fast. There was nowhere to go. She heard Nathan shout her name, followed by the thunder of hooves. Clutching Abigail to her chest, Tamara braced herself for impact. It never came. Instead, Nathan and his horse flashed between her and the charging bull. With a skill born of years in the saddle, Nathan used his mount to block and turn the animal, forcing it away from Tamara and back toward the herd. The other ranch hands quickly moved in, surrounding the unruly steer and herding it toward the corral. Nathan wheeled his horse around and was beside her in seconds, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his face pale beneath his tan. "No," Tamara managed, though her voice shook. "We're fine. Thanks to you." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, as if he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure he should. "You're sure? Both of you?" "Yes." She tried to smile reassuringly, but her legs suddenly felt weak. "Though I might need to sit down." Nathan's arm was around her waist instantly, supporting her as he guided her to the porch steps. "Here," he said, helping her sit. "Put your head between your knees if you feel faint." Abigail, remarkably, had remained calm throughout the ordeal and now looked up at Nathan with bright, curious eyes. He gazed back at her for a moment, then gently touched her cheek with one finger. "Brave little thing," he murmured. "Like your mother." Tamara lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "Thank you," she said again with feeling. "That was incredible what you did." A flush crept up his neck. "Just did what needed doing." He sat beside her on the step, keeping a respectable distance between them. "That old bull's been trouble since we brought him in last spring. Might be time to sell him to someone with more patience than me." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the earlier awkwardness between them forgotten in the aftermath of shared danger. Abigail began to fuss, and Tamara adjusted her position to nurse her discreetly. Nathan cleared his throat. "I should go help the men finish with the herd," he said, rising. But he didn't move away immediately. Instead, he looked down at Tamara and Abigail, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "I'm glad you're both all right. Thanks to you," she repeated softly. He shook his head. "I should have been more careful with that bull. Known better than to drive him past the house." His voice took on an edge of self-recrimination. "If anything had happened to you, or Abigail." "But it didn't," she interrupted gently. "We're fine, Nathan." He nodded, but the troubled look remained in his eyes as he turned to leave. Tamara watched him go, her heart full of complicated emotions. The danger had passed, but something told her that the real storm was still brewing between them. That evening, Nathan came to the cabin after dinner, something he hadn't done since she'd moved back in after the storm. He knocked softly, and when Tamara opened the door, she found him standing there with an uncertain expression and a small wooden box in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked formally. "Of course." She stepped back, puzzled by his serious demeanor. "Abigail's already asleep." He nodded, entering the cabin and standing awkwardly in the center of the small main room. "That's probably for the best. What I have to say is for you alone." Tamara's pulse quickened. "Is something wrong?"
No.
"At least, I hope not." He set the box on the table and turned to face her fully. "Today made me realize something, Tamara. Life out here is unpredictable, dangerous sometimes. Any day could be our last. That's true anywhere, she pointed out, wondering where this was leading. Yes, but it's more immediate here. He took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say, badly, is that I don't want to waste any more time pretending. Pretending what? She asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. Pretending that I don't care for you far more than an employer should care for his housekeeper. The words came out in a rush. Pretending that watching you with Abigail doesn't make me wish for things I never thought I'd want. Pretending that the only reason I bought your contract was out of some abstract sense of decency. Tamara's breath caught in her throat. Nathan. He held up a hand. Please let me finish. I'm not good at this sort of thing. He gestured to the box on the table. Open it. With trembling fingers, Tamara lifted the lid of the small wooden box. Inside lay a folded document. She looked at Nathan questioningly. Your contract, he explained. I'm releasing you from it. As of now, you're free to go wherever you wish. Do whatever you want with your life. You owe me nothing. Tamara stared at the document, emotions warring within her. You're firing me? No, he said quickly. I'm freeing you. There's a difference. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. You can still stay here, still work for me if you wish. But it would be as a free woman, not someone bound by a contract I purchased. Understanding dawned. You're doing this so that if something were to develop between us, it would be your choice, he finished for her. Completely and truly your choice, with no obligation or power imbalance between us. Tears sprang to Tamara's eyes at the nobility of the gesture. She picked up the contract, noting that he had indeed signed and dated the release. This is the most honorable thing anyone has ever done for me, she said softly. Nathan's expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I don't expect anything in return, Tamara. If you want to take Abigail and start fresh somewhere else, I'll help you however I can. If you want to stay as my housekeeper and nothing more, that's your right. But if you... He hesitated. If you might feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, I'd like the chance to court you properly. Tamara carefully set the contract back in the box, her mind racing. She had grown to care deeply for Nathan over these past months, but was it love? And was she ready to open her heart again after losing James so painfully? I need time, she said finally. This is unexpected. He nodded, disappointment flickering across his face though he tried to hide it. Of course. Take all the time you need. He moved toward the door. Good night, Tamara. Nathan, she called as he reached for the handle. When he turned back, she said, Thank you. For everything. A sad smile touched his lips. You're welcome. After he'd gone, Tamara sat at the table for a long while, staring at the contract in the box. Freedom. It was a gift beyond price, one that showed the true measure of Nathan Drake's character. Whatever she decided about his other offer, she would never forget this gesture. The next morning, Tamara rose early, having slept little. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair more neatly than usual. After feeding and changing Abigail, she made her way to the main house to prepare breakfast as always. Nathan was already in the kitchen when she arrived, attempting to make coffee. He looked up as she entered, surprise and uncertainty crossing his face. Good morning, she said, setting Abigail's basket on the table. I see you're trying to poison yourself with that coffee. A smile tugged at his mouth. It's not that bad. It's terrible, and you know it. She moved to take over, her fingers brushing his as she reached for the coffee pot. The brief contact sent a familiar warmth through her. Let me. He stepped back, watching her as she efficiently measured the correct amount of coffee and set it to brew properly. You didn't have to come in today, he said carefully. I meant what I said about the contract. I know you did. She turned to face him, gathering her courage. I've been thinking about what you said last night, and his voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. And I realized something important. She took a step closer to him. I've been free to leave for months now, Nathan. You've never once treated me like an indentured servant. You've paid me fair wages, given me autonomy, respected my decisions about Abigail. The contract was just a piece of paper. His brow furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying that I stayed because I wanted to, not because I was bound to. Another step closer. And I want to keep staying, not as your housekeeper, but because... Her voice faltered slightly. Because I care for you too. More than I should, more than I thought possible after James. The hope that kindled in his eyes gave her the courage to continue. I'm not ready to call it love yet, she admitted. It's too soon, and too much has happened. But I'd like the chance to find out if it could be. So yes, Nathan Drake, you may court me properly, if that offer still stands. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. It stands, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached for her hand, enfolding it in his. I'll do right by you, Tamara. You and Abigail both. I promise you that. I know you will, she said softly. And she did know, with a certainty that surprised her. Whatever happened between them, Nathan Drake was a man of honor who would keep his word. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was a chaste gesture, but it sent a shiver of anticipation through her. This was just the beginning, she realized. The beginning of something that could be wonderful if they were brave enough to let it grow. The news that Nathan Drake was officially courting his former indentured servant spread through the town like wildfire. Some were scandalized, others merely amused. A few, like Rosa, were openly delighted. It is about time, the older woman declared when they told her. I have seen how you look at each other. Like two children afraid to ask for candy. Nathan had laughed at the comparison, but Tamara thought it was apartment. There was something sweetly tentative about their courtship, like children discovering something new and precious. They took things slowly. Nathan was careful to maintain propriety, especially in public. Tamara continued to live in the cabin with Abigail, though she now took her meals with Nathan in the main house. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, talking or sometimes just watching the sunset in comfortable silence. One evening in late July, as they sat side by side on the porch swing Nathan had hung specifically for them, he brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. I've been thinking about Abigail, he said, watching the baby as she played on a blanket at their feet. At 5 months old, she was learning to sit up on her own and was fascinated by everything around her. What about her? Tamara asked, curious about his serious tone. Nathan reached down to offer Abigail his finger, which she grabbed with her usual enthusiasm. She has no legal father now, he said carefully. No one to protect her interests if something were to happen to you. Tamara stiffened slightly. Nothing is going to happen to me. I pray not, he agreed. But life is uncertain, as we've discussed before. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I would like your permission to legally adopt her. To give her my name and make her my heir. Tamara stared at him, stunned by the offer. Nathan. I don't know what to say. It doesn't have to be right away, he added quickly. And it doesn't have to change anything between us. I just want to make sure she's provided for no matter what. Tears welled in Tamara's eyes. The thought of Nathan caring so deeply for Abigail, wanting to make her legally his daughter, touched her profoundly. You would do that for her? For a child who isn't yours by blood? She already feels like mine in here, he said simply, touching his chest over his heart. Has almost from the beginning. I just want to make it official. Tamara looked down at her daughter, who was now happily gumming Nathan's finger. The sight made her smile, through her tears. I think James would approve, she said softly. He would want her to have a father who loves her. Then you'll consider it? Nathan asked, hope evident in his voice.
Yes, she said.
But Nathan, this feels like more than just providing for her future. It feels like I'm asking to be part of your family permanently, he finished for her. I suppose I am, in a way. He took her hand in his. I told you I'd court you properly, and I meant it. But I also want you to know that my intentions are serious. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want to build a life with you and Abigail. A real life, as a family. The declaration hung in the air between them, both a promise and a question. Tamara's heart pounded in her chest. It was too soon to make such decisions, and yet she couldn't deny that the picture he painted the three of them as a true family was deeply appealing. I need more time, she said again, echoing her response from that night in the cabin. But Nathan, I'm not saying no. I just need to be sure. He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. I understand. There's no rush. A smile touched his lips. We have all the time in the world. As the summer progressed into fall, their relationship deepened and strengthened. Nathan proved to be a patient and considerate suitor, never pushing for more than Tamara was ready to give. He courted her with small gestures, wildflowers left on the porch, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a necklace of silver and turquoise purchased from a traveling Navajo trader. More meaningful than the gifts, however, was the way he integrated himself into their daily lives. He began coming in from the range earlier to spend time with Abigail before her bedtime. He would read to her, or simply hold her while he and Tamara talked about their days. The baby adored him, lighting up whenever he entered a room. For Tamara, watching this bond develop between the man she was growing to love and her daughter was a gift beyond measure. She had worried, in the dark hours of the night after James's death, that Abigail would grow up without a father's influence. Now, seeing Nathan's natural ease with her, those fears were laid to rest. September brought slightly cooler temperatures and the annual harvest festival in town. Nathan suggested they attend together, making their courtship publicly official in a way that would silence any remaining gossip. Are you sure? Tamara asked, concerned. It might affect your standing in the community, being seen openly with me in that way. Nathan's response was immediate and firm. Anyone who would think less of me for courting you is not someone whose opinion I value. And so, on a pleasant Saturday afternoon, they rode into town together in Nathan's best wagon, with Abigail dressed in a new gown that Rosa had lovingly sewn for the occasion. Tamara wore her blue dress, freshly laundered and pressed, with the turquoise necklace Nathan had given her. Nathan himself had put on his good suit, though he insisted on wearing his familiar black hat. It's brought me luck so far, he told her with a wink as they set off. Why tempt fate? The Harvest Festival was held in the town square, with booths selling food and handcrafted goods, games for the children, and a dance planned for the evening. As they walked among the stalls, Tamara was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. But Nathan seemed oblivious, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. They were examining a display of handmade quilts when a familiar voice interrupted them. Well, if it isn't the happy family. Tamara turned to find Silas Jennings standing behind them, his thin lips curved in a sneer. He was slightly drunk, judging by the flush on his face and the glass in his hand. Nathan stiffened beside her. Jennings, he acknowledged coldly. If you'll excuse us. Not so fast, Jennings said, stepping to block their path. His eyes raked over Tamara in a way that made her skin crawl. I'm curious, Mrs. Cooper. How much does Drake here pay you for your services? More than the $3 I offered at the auction. Before Tamara could respond, Nathan had handed Abigail to her and stepped between her and Jennings. Apologize to the lady, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Jennings laughed. What lady? All I see is a woman who sold herself to the highest bidder. The punch happened so fast that Tamara barely saw it, just a blur of motion, and then Jennings was sprawled in the dust, blood streaming from his nose. Nathan stood over him, his fists still clenched. "I said, apologize to the lady," he repeated. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Sheriff Mills pushed his way through, looking exasperated. "What in tarnation is going on here?" "Just a difference of opinion, Sheriff," Nathan said calmly, though Tamara could see the anger still simmering beneath his composed exterior. "Mr. Jennings said something ungentlemanly about Mrs. Cooper. I took exception." Mills sighed, looking between the two men. "Jennings, can you stand?" The saloon owner struggled to his feet, dabbing at his bloody nose with a handkerchief. "I want him arrested for assault," he demanded. "And I want you arrested for public indecency," countered an unexpected voice from the crowd. Mrs. Wilson, the seamstress, stepped forward. "I heard what you said to Mrs. Cooper, Silas Jennings, and it was disgraceful. If Mr. Drake hadn't hit you, I might have done it myself." Several other townspeople murmured their agreement. Tamara was startled to realize that many of the gathered crowd were looking at Jennings with disapproval, not at her or Nathan. Sheriff Mills seemed to pick up on the shift in public opinion as well. "Seems to me you got what was coming to you, Jennings," he said dryly. "I suggest you go home and sleep it off. And in the future, watch your mouth around the ladies." Jennings glared at them all, but he knew when he was beaten. "This isn't over, Drake," he muttered as he stalked away. The sheriff turned to Nathan. "As for you, try to keep your fists to yourself at public gatherings, would you? I've got enough to worry about without breaking up fights." "Yes, sir," Nathan agreed, though there was no regret in his voice. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Wilson approached Tamara. "Don't you mind Jennings, dear," she said kindly. "Most of us in town are happy to see you and Mr. Drake together. It's a proper romance, that's what I tell everyone." Tamara was touched by the unexpected support. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That means a great deal to me." The older woman patted her arm. "You bring that beautiful baby by the shop sometime. I've got some fabric that would make her a lovely winter dress." After she'd gone, Tamara turned to Nathan, who was flexing his right hand gingerly. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised knuckles," he assured her. "Worth it." She gave him a reproving look. "You shouldn't have hit him, Nathan. Violence never solves anything." "It solved the immediate problem of him insulting you," Nathan pointed out, then sighed at her expression. "But you're right. I lost my temper. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you." "You didn't," she admitted. "In fact, it was rather gallant, in an old-fashioned way." She couldn't help the small smile that curved her lips. "No one's ever defended my honor before." He grinned back at her. "Well, get used to it. As long as I'm around, no one gets to speak about you that way." The rest of the festival passed without incident. To Tamara's surprise, several townspeople went out of their way to be friendly to them, including the banker and his wife, who invited them to dinner the following week. It seemed Mrs. Wilson was right, the town was beginning to accept their relationship. As evening fell, the musicians set up for the dance. Nathan turned to Tamara with a questioning look. "Would you like to dance?" Rosa said she'd watch Abigail. Sure enough, Rosa had materialized beside them, arms already reaching for the baby. "Go," she urged Tamara. "Young people should dance. I will take good care of the little one." Tamara hesitated only briefly before handing Abigail over. "Thank you, Rosa." Nathan led her to the dance floor just as the musician struck up a waltz. He took her in his arms with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. "You dance well," she observed as he guided her smoothly through the steps. "My mother insisted on lessons," he explained. "Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn colt." Tamara laughed at the image. "She sounds like a formidable woman." "She was," he agreed, a touch of sadness in his voice. "She would have liked you, I think." Strong women always recognized each other. The compliment warmed her. As they continued to dance, Tamara was aware of how right it felt to be in Nathan's arms, how naturally they moved together. The months of careful friendship and tentative courtship had built a foundation of trust and understanding between them that made this physical closeness feel like a natural progression rather than a leap into the unknown. When the music ended, Nathan didn't immediately release her. Instead, he gazed down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tamara," he said softly, "I've been patient.
I've given you time.
And I'll wait as long as you need." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "But I want you to know that I love you. I think I have almost from the beginning." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected, still sent a wave of emotion through her. She looked up into his earnest blue eyes and knew, with sudden clarity, that her heart had made its decision long ago. She had just been too cautious, too afraid of being hurt again, to acknowledge it. "Nathan," she whispered, "I love you too." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Right here, in front of everyone?" She nodded, her heart pounding. He bent his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, before his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle, yet filled with promise. It lasted only a moment, propriety demanding restraint in such a public setting, but it was enough to seal the shift in their relationship. When they broke apart, Tamara was aware of several people watching them, some with approval, others with surprise. But for once, she didn't care what anyone thought. She was in love with Nathan Drake, and he loved her. Everything else was secondary. They found Rosa sitting on a bench near the edge of the square, Abigail sleeping peacefully in her arms. The older woman took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "It is about time," she said simply, rising to hand the baby back to Tamara. "Now perhaps you will stop dancing around each other like shy children, yes?" Nathan laughed, his arms slipping around Tamara's waist. "Yes, Rosa. I think that particular dance is over." As they drove home under a sky full of stars, Abigail sleeping in a basket between them, Tamara felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before James's death. There was still much to figure out: where they would live, when and how they would marry, how to legally formalize Nathan's relationship with Abigail, but the most important question had been answered. They loved each other, and they would face whatever came next together. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. She smiled, placing her hand over his on the reins. "The future. Our future." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "It looks bright from where I'm sitting." And as they rode toward home, toward the life they would build together, Tamara had to agree. The future did indeed look very bright indeed. 2 weeks after the Harvest Festival, Nathan proposed properly, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a delicate gold band set with a small but flawless diamond. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Rosa, the ranch hands, and a few friends from town in attendance. Reverend Thomas officiated, his kind face beaming with approval as Nathan and Tamara exchanged their vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers. As part of the ceremony, Nathan formally adopted Abigail, promising to love and protect her as his own daughter. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests when he knelt to place a tiny gold locket around the baby's neck, symbolizing his commitment to her. "With this gift, I pledge to be your father in all ways that matter," he said softly, though everyone could hear in the hushed silence. "From this day forward, you are Abigail Drake, my beloved daughter." Tamara had wept openly at the gesture, her heart overflowing with love for this man who had saved them both in more ways than one. The adoption was made legal the following week, with papers filed at the county seat that gave Abigail Nathan's name and made her his legal heir. It was a significant step, one that ensured her future security no matter what happened. Married life suited them well. Tamara moved into the main house, turning her former cabin into a guest cottage for when Rosa stayed overnight or visitors came to the ranch. She continued to manage the household, but now as mistress rather than servant, with the authority to hire additional help as needed. Nathan expanded his business interests, using some of the maps and surveys from his previous career to identify new water sources that allowed him to increase his herd. The Drake Ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and horses, bringing prosperity that allowed them to make improvements to the house and property. Abigail thrived under their care, growing into a happy, curious toddler who followed Nathan around the ranch whenever possible, solemnly observing his work and asking endless questions once she learned to talk. He was endlessly patient with her, answering every why and how with the same seriousness he would have afforded an adult. "She has a scientific mind," he told Tamara proudly after 6-year-old Abigail had spent an hour asking him detailed questions about how the windmill worked. "We should make sure she gets a proper education." Tamara agreed. Though Tucson now had a school, they decided to hire a tutor for Abigail and the children of several neighboring ranchers, converting the old foreman's cabin into a small schoolhouse. Miss Perkins, a young woman from Boston with impeccable credentials and a sense of adventure that had brought her west, proved to be an excellent teacher who nurtured Abigail's natural curiosity. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life, the changing seasons bringing their own challenges and rewards, the family growing closer with each shared experience. Tamara and Nathan's love deepened and matured, transforming from the first heady rush of romance into something more enduring, a partnership built on respect, trust, and unwavering commitment. In their 3rd year of marriage, they welcomed a son, whom they named James Nathan Drake in honor of both Abigail's birth father and her adoptive one. Abigail, now 7, took her role as big sister very seriously, helping Tamara with the baby and solemnly explaining to little Jamie, as they called him, how everything on the ranch worked. "She gets that from you," Tamara told Nathan one evening as they watched Abigail demonstrating to the toddler how to properly pet a kitten. "That need to make sure everyone understands things correctly." Nathan chuckled. "Maybe so, but she has your compassion. That's a far more valuable trait." 2 years after Jamie came another daughter, Emily Rose, completing their family. Nathan doted on all 3 children equally, never showing any preference for his biological offspring over Abigail. To him, she was his first child, the one who had taught him how to be a father, and his love for her was boundless. Silas Jennings remained a shadow over their happiness for several years, periodically making trouble in town or spreading malicious gossip about how Nathan had bought his wife. But as the Drakes' standing in the community grew, Jennings's influence waned. Eventually, he sold his saloon and moved further west, supposedly to try his luck in California. No one was sorry to see him go. 10 years after that fateful day at the auction, the Drakes hosted a celebration for their anniversary. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the territory, and their home was now a spacious, comfortable dwelling that regularly welcomed friends and travelers. As twilight fell, Nathan found Tamara standing on the porch, watching Abigail, now a lovely young woman of 10, playing a game of tag with Jamie and Emily, while Rosa's grandchildren joined in the fun. He slipped his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him with the easy familiarity of long-married lovers. "Happy?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Completely," she replied, turning to smile up at him. At 32, Tamara was more beautiful than ever, the years having added character and confidence to her delicate features. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." Nathan nodded, his gaze moving from their children to the prosperous ranch spread out before them. "It's been quite a journey. I still think about that day sometimes," she admitted. "How close we came to a very different fate. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't raised your hand." He tightened his arm around her. "But I was, and I did. And I've thanked God for it every day since." She turned in his embrace to face him fully. "Do you know what Abigail asked me yesterday? She wanted to know how we met." I realized I've never told her the full story. What did you tell her? Nathan asked curiously. Tamara smiled. I told her that when I was at my lowest point, when I had nothing and nowhere to turn, a man in a black hat saw something in me worth saving. And that sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms. Nathan's eyes, still that striking blue though now framed by lines earned from years of squinting into the Arizona sun, softened with emotion. You saved me too, you know, he said quietly. I was just existing before you and Abigail came into my life. You gave me a reason to truly live. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar contours with tenderness. I love you, Nathan Drake. More with each passing year. And I love you, Tamara Drake. He bent to kiss her, a kiss that held the warmth of a decade's shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, a kiss that promised many more years to come. From the yard came the sound of children's laughter, a reminder of the legacy they were building together. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms as the first stars appeared in the evening sky, both were thinking the same thing, that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely circumstances, even at an auction block in a dusty Arizona town, with a woman, a baby, and a cowboy in a black hat whose raised hand changed everything.